Hello and welcome to the interview here on France 24. Simulated drowning, sleep deprivation, nudity, slamming against a flexible wall. That's just a short list of some of the more notorious methods that were authorized by former U.S. President George W. Bush and his senior associates in their so-called war against terror. Now, the Bush administration has always said that it was called enhanced interrogation techniques used to get information out of men they say posed a very grave threat to the United States. But my guest today, Reed Brody, who is a legal advisor from Human Rights Watch, thanks for joining us.
You're welcome.
You have another term for it. You say it's torture, pure and simple, no matter what they want to call it. And you're saying Bush should finally be held to account. In a new report, Human Rights Watch is basically calling for an investigation into the actions taken not just by George Bush, but by his top associates, Vice President Dick Cheney, former Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld, and the former CIA chief George Tenet. You want a full investigation, almost a 9/11-style commission. Why are you calling for this right now? What's the timing about? Because we've known about this for a while. Bush has even acknowledged waterboarding.
Well, we've looked at the thousands of documents that have come available, the admissions by President Bush and others in their memoirs, the different Senate and reports that have come out, and analyzed them according to American and international law. And come to the conclusion that there is a strong case for the responsibility of President Bush, Vice President Cheney, Secretary Rumsfeld, Director Tenet, but that unfortunately there seems to be no movement at the level of the Obama administration to do that. Just a couple of weeks ago, the Attorney General called a halt or declared over the investigations into the actions of Eric Holder, who had appointed a special prosecutor to look into unauthorized actions and to look at the actions of agents who went beyond the authorizations. The problem is that this pattern of abuse across 3 continents, Guantanamo, Abu Ghraib, Afghanistan, wasn't the result of some soldiers who broke the rules. It was the result of high-level decisions
top officials,
by President Bush, by Secretary Rumsfeld and others, to cast those rules aside.
And it's really interesting because at the time, they had lawyers throughout the White House that were essentially, I guess you could argue, giving them the legal justification, the legal backing to go ahead and do it. They were basically saying, we'll give you the legal framework in which to torture.
That's right. And when President Bush acknowledged that he authorized the waterboarding of some prisoners, he said, well, my lawyer said it was okay. Now, of course, first of all, that's not a legally defense, and somebody like George Bush should have known that waterboarding, in which you hold a prisoner underwater and make him drown essentially until you save him at the last minute.
We've seen pictures of it. It's absolutely horrific.
And it's a practice that has always been considered by the United States and even prosecuted by the United States as torture. But leaving aside that he should have known, what we show in this report is that the justifications presented or prepared by the Justice Department were not arm's length independent analyses. What we show in this report is that, led by Vice President Dick Cheney and his chief lawyer, the administration actually went to the Justice Department, put pressure on the Justice Department.
You're saying they were complicit, essentially.
They were complicit.
They were shills for the president.
What we're saying is that there are grounds to believe that there was a conspiracy that included these officials, that included the lawyers, that included these legal memoranda that purported to say that waterboarding was okay.
Let me ask you something. Let me do something our viewers are going to hear me rarely do on air, but let's give George W. Bush the benefit of the doubt for a second. Vice President Dick Cheney is also, he comes under some pretty heavy-handed criticism in this report. He's singled out. He's seen as the driving force. I think you describe him as the driving force behind a lot of these illegal detentions and these enhanced interrogation techniques. He was in the CIA meetings where they were discussed.
That's right.
Was he the one influencing Bush on this? Was he pushing it?
Cheney was certainly the the conceiver of this. He was certainly the one who went to the Justice Department, who put pressure on the lawyers to come up with this result. He was, as you say, I mean, he was one of the people in the room together with Rumsfeld and Tenet and others who approved these practices. But in the end, he's not in the chain of command. It was George Bush who had to authorize the waterboarding. It was George Bush who authorized the practice of secret detention around the world. It was George Bush who authorized ultimately the renditions practice in which prisoners were sent to countries like Syria and Egypt, where torture is systematic and in which they were in fact tortured.
That was the rendition. What was it?
Extraordinary renditions. We know that between 100 and 150 prisoners were sent by the United States or with United States complicity to places where where the U.S. State Department says the torture is rampant, and in many instances the evidence would suggest that that's why they were sent there.
That's why they were sent. Let me ask you, you're calling for an investigation. You'd like to see I think you said a 9/11 style commission almost. That would really unearth all the facts.
Well, we're looking at two things. We're calling for two separate things. One is prosecution or investigation of individuals, a criminal investigation. And the other is a more wide-ranging 9/11 commission style truth commission to see how it is that the American system was so perverted that lawyers said you can waterboard, that you can send people to place, and to see what can be put into place so that it doesn't happen again.
Is the appetite there among the American people, the American public, to have an investigation of this nature? I mean, it's always very difficult to hear about how horrific your government and the things they're doing behind your back. Do the Americans want this investigation? Aren't a lot of people just going to say, "Oh, Human Rights Watch, come on, let bygones be bygones. We've moved on."
It's hard to move. First of all, it's hard to move on. I mean, one of our complaints is that torture is being treated by President Obama as a policy choice, an unfortunate policy choice by the Bush administration, but a policy choice, not as a crime. And so President Obama, to his credit, has stopped, has stopped authorizing torture, has disbanded the program of secret prisons, but unless that. But those decisions are easily reversible and are very fragile. It's like a loaded gun that's on the table. I'm not going to do it, but maybe the next guy is going to do it.
Why do you think Barack Obama has been, and it seems from the way you're describing it, hesitant in being a little more forceful in what his predecessor allegedly did?
Well, as you say, I mean, it's a question of expending political capital. We know, the president has other priorities, health care, budget. But, this is the law. I mean, this is torture. And it's certainly in America's interest. I mean, we now know that these policies, which were sold to the American public as making America safer against terrorism, has actually made America much more vulnerable. We know that pictures of Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo are used as recruiting posters for jihad. We know that people join jihadist organizations out of resentment at seeing the systematic mistreatment of Muslim prisoners. And America's standing in the world, America's national security would be enhanced by going through this process, as painful and maybe as politically difficult as it certainly would be.
And I guess you could equally make the argument with what we see right now going on in the Arab Springs, it would also enhance America's credibility when it asks others to respect human rights.
Sure. I mean, it's the United States is right to call for justice in places like Libya and Syria and Sri Lanka. But there can't be double standards. You can't have one justice for Arab countries or African countries and another justice for the United States. And, when the United States is seen to be protecting, officials who authorize torture, it makes it much more difficult to say, well, you should bring your torturers to justice.
And right now, actually, on the international stage, George W. Bush, he had to cancel a trip to Switzerland, right? I think Spain is investigating as well.
That's right.
Internationally, there's some countries who consider these officials arrestable.
Well, as well they should. And what we're saying, as well as in the report, is that if the United States doesn't take on these investigations, that other countries have the absolute right to do so under principles of international law. And there are 150 countries that have ratified the Torture Convention. That requires them, when an alleged torturer comes into their territory, to investigate that person.
But just to be out geopolitically, a realpolitik, as they call it, do you really see a lot of countries taking up this case and saying, if George W. Bush steps on our soil, we're going to arrest him, or Dick Cheney?
It's obviously politically very difficult. But, European countries exercise that jurisdiction when an Algerian alleged torturer or a Rwandan alleged torturer comes into their territory. I mean, there can't be double standards. And this is, I spend a lot of time working on justice issues in Africa and the Middle East. And people always say, well, what about Guantanamo? What about Abu Ghraib? Why don't you guys take care of your own stuff? And it really undermines the entire system when there seems to be such a double standard operating.
So we'll be more credible, the U.S. will be more credible if it addresses these issues, faces up to them, and then perhaps even prosecutes them, as you suggest, very briefly.
Absolutely. As difficult as it is, it's not only a legal obligation, but it's a moral obligation, and will strengthen U.S. security to show the world that the repudiation of torture is real.
Reed Brody, legal advisor for Human Rights Watch. Thanks for being my guest today. We've been discussing a new 107-page report from Human Rights Watch, basically calling on the United States to investigate what it says was torture under the previous administration of George W. Bush. It's a matter of the U.S.'s credibility as a member of the world community when it comes to human rights. Thanks to all of you for watching.